Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of our photography research videos. Today we're going to be looking at landscape and architecture photographers and still using the 5Cs analysis process in order to research these photographers. Obviously, with the circumstance at the minute, capturing landscape and architecture images might not be as simple as we've been able to experience in the past, but I will also be giving you some tips and tricks that you can use using programs like Photoshop and other editing software. As I mentioned in our last video, it is really important to start looking at the people who started landscape photography. So Ansel Adams is a really big player in the landscape photography field, as well as William Eggleston for his bright, colourful city landscapes. We've shown you the work of Stephen Short at the beginning of this video. His work is particularly American, so it might be that you want to represent your hometown or even your home in your own style. Remember that representing your home within your photography, although it might seem boring to you, will definitely be really interesting for your audience and offers a different viewpoint on life and society. So when researching the work of landscape photographers, again using the 5Cs analysis process, there is a lot more to talk about. Taking this photograph by William Eggleston as an example, when talking about your content, you can talk about the fact there are 2 cars in the image, one of which looks reasonably abandoned. You can also talk about the fact there are 2 drink dispensers on one side, again, both of which look quite neglected, and the fact that the scene is quite empty. You can't see anybody around, so you need to make sure you're talking about all of that content. Moving on to composition now, I've chosen this image by photographer Tom Haider. He does a lot of landscapes and architecture images that are quite blurry and quite faded, which is really good also as a way to experiment with your practice. However, I've chosen this image because it demonstrates the rule of thirds, and in our last video we talked about compositional techniques and the really popular ones that we often use. Now this image shows the rule of thirds for this reason, and I'll show you a diagram now. Obviously our hotel sign is resting near one of the third lines, which draws the viewer's attention in more, allows the viewer to be more engaged within the photograph, so you would want to comment on things like this. This next image by the same photographer uses a central composition, so although it's not on one of the third lines, it's directly in the middle of the photograph. It uses some of those leading lines to draw us into the centre, and that way it engages the audience. So you want to talk about things like this within your work. If you are struggling to find a compositional technique that's used, then just ask me. I can always help you and demonstrate what I think it is, or otherwise just use any good reputable photography platform on Google. They'll be able to give you some advice as well, and even diagrams to represent their thinking. The next part of the analysis process is context, and we're going to look at one of my all-time favourite photographers, which is Gregory Crewdson. He produces these staged, almost film-like scenes within his work. Now, with context, it's important that you research the photographer's meaning behind the image, and this can be done really easily. A quick Google search for me took me to the Victoria and Albert Museum website, and it had a whole written accompaniment with it, which I'll show here. So this piece of writing on the V&A website is directly from Gregory Crewdson. So this is taken from the foreword of his book. It talks about why he wants to take the photographs. All of the images in his book are taken at night, hence the title of Twilight. But he wants to create these frozen moments akin to making of a feature film. It obviously, I've talked about it in the past, operates on an epic scale, so he uses a really large crew and then develops the images in post-production. So there is a process to doing these images, but all of his work is meticulously planned and staged, especially the lighting. Sometimes he brings in artificial rain or dry ice and just enhancing that natural moment of the twilight. So it is really important you read around the subject just to understand why the photographer has captured the images like they have, rather than it just being what you think they might have done. There is information out there if you just look for it. So to end the analysis process, you're going to talk about 2 things: connection and comment. Connection is, why does this piece of work relate to your intentions, and what are you going to take from it? So what inspires you about it? What are you going to experiment with, or what are you going to try? And then finally is comments. So do you like the image or do you not like the image? You can be really honest in this section as long as it's backed up with reasoning. So that is just a brief overview again of the analysis process in relation to landscape and architecture. I've shown you quite a few photographers in this section. These are my favourite photographers that I really like from the genre, but I will just cycle through now some other photographers that might be of use to you as well. So obviously we've got the work of Stephen Shaw, who we showed right at the beginning. A lot of architecture photographers who pioneered the genre as well, which is really good to look at. And we've got a mix of colour and black and white as well, which is always really useful. So make sure when you're researching you've got a variety of photographers. Try to choose people who are very different just so you can see where you want to go with your final major project. Obviously, as I mentioned before, with the situation going on at the moment with the UK lockdown in response to coronavirus, it is really important to discuss ways in which we can experiment with our ideas. So in this section, I'll be talking about how you can experiment using Photoshop and also manual editing techniques. So the first place I'm going to start with is collage, which is quite easy to do either using found photography or photographs you've taken previously, or even photographs you've taken currently that are inside your home or in your local surroundings. So we've got two photographers here. David Hockney is the person who sort of pioneered the photo collage, and he uses art techniques as well as photography techniques to complete his outcomes. Following from this, we've got photographer and artist Matthew Brandt, who uses bleach and other sort of corrosive materials in his work to produce these really interesting landscapes. Obviously, word of caution, if you are going to use bleach or any other substance like he would use, then just be really, really careful. Make sure you're wearing appropriate gloves and coverings for your clothing as well, just to make sure that you're safe. But his outcomes are really interesting. They had a lot of impactful colour, but also make the viewer think about how the environment might shape the way in which we live or shape the way in which we capture our photographs. Another really interesting technique that this photographer uses is he sometimes soaks his prints and develops them in water that is from the location in which the photographs were captured. So this picture here, the photograph was captured at a lake near where he lived and where he worked, and he took a sample of the water and soaked the image in that water, so it does create context and meaning alongside the experimentation. Moving into digital manipulation, we've now got the work of Victoria Seimer, who uses digital manipulation techniques to create these really interesting and almost surreal landscapes. I will be doing a tutorial on how to do this next week potentially, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, if you do want to try something like this, there are tutorials available on the Adobe website or even on YouTube that you can try out. It'd be really good to see what you can do with this. And finally, to end our manipulation section and experimentation section, I'm going to look at the work of Stephanie Jung, who uses Photoshop to layer images and stack images together to create these really interesting landscapes. Now, this is possible to do with any landscape. It doesn't have to be a cityscape like Stephanie Jung has done. It can be an image of your house, it can be an image of your bedroom or somewhere like a room in your house that you really like, but it could also just be the view from your window. Second years have already tried this during our Work Inspired By module, but it is really good to come back on this if it is something that you're interested in doing. And that's all I've got time for today. If you do have any questions or you don't understand any of the content that I've gone through today, then please just ask me. I'm on Microsoft Teams all week and all of next week and even over Easter as well. So please just send your questions in and I'll try my best to answer them. But for now, happy researching and I'll see you next time. Bye.